Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Board Masters with me, Chris Mullins, and today I am going to be giving my opinions on basically the 6 scenarios making up the Shadows of Mirkwood cycle, following on from our completed run-throughs over the last weeks and months. And I'm not going to be talking about them in terms of the value of the cards included in them, in terms of how useful those cards are throughout future expansions, because quite frankly I don't have the knowledge on that. I will purely be talking through my enjoyment of the scenarios individually, and also I'm not going to be giving like an overall score or going through the 5 standard categories that I usually cover for reviews, because I've done a review of the core game which I'll link down below, and that pretty much still applies to this. This doesn't really expand on any of the, it doesn't change the art and the theme or the component quality or the accessibility. It does boost the replayability, as any and all expansions do, but obviously at an increased cost. And the core gameplay is basically the same, but changed up for each specific scenario. So I will touch on that, but not enough to do like a full review. So starting with the beginning of the cycle, so we had A Hunt for Gollum as the first one, and this is probably my least favourite one of the 6. Still really good fun, and the new cards and everything were really interesting and changed the dynamic. But basically, and I'll link to the gameplays of all 6 of these down below as well, although there may be more than that. I won't link to them, they'll be in the playlist, because I know some of these I lost, so there's multiple playthroughs of some scenarios, so I won't link to all of them, or there'll be 10 or links. So I'll link to the core game review, and the gameplays will be in the playlist. So A Hunt for Gollum, basically it was almost like waiting for a bus, in that the core game is still really fun. So you were questing, you were fighting, you were managing the threat and everything, but you couldn't actually complete the game until you found signs of Gollum, which you had to wait to come through the encounter deck. You can get then the situation where they come out as a shadow card and they get then put in the discard pile, or there are treacheries which put the cards in the discard pile, and then you've got to wait for it to come all the way back round, which isn't the most fun mechanic. Nobody wants to just tread water and wait, and unfortunately there is a bit too much of that in that scenario. It's still, as I said, the gameplay is really fun, but in terms of the actual theme and the way it changes the gameplay up from the core game, it's one of the weakest of the set in my opinion. Next, on to Conflict at the Carrack, and this one is similar in that it was almost like a waiting game, but it was far more enjoyable because you had to actively engage in the process. You couldn't just sorry about that, the dishwasher randomly went off after being silent for 20-30 minutes. So back to Conflict at the Carrack, it's one where you have to be far more proactive. So although you're waiting because you have to build your army before you get to a position before you can challenge these big scary trolls, you have to maintain a low threat. You have to be questing, and well, you have to manage your questing so you're keeping your threat down whilst clearing locations without ever questing so successfully that you bring the trolls in too early. And it's a really interesting balancing act. But my one negative was, if you get that balancing act right, and you get the army and you've got the threat low, and then you're able to engage the trolls one at a time, it does almost become a bit of a foregone conclusion in terms of the result, because once you're in that position, it's really, really hard to lose, I think. So it does feel like you're going through the motions at the end of the game just to get that victory. But it is a really hard scenario. It was the one that forced me to go away from just using the core sphere decks, which I had done all the way up to this point, and this scenario basically forced my hand to get into the deck building side of the game, which I really enjoyed in the end. And once I'd done that and refined the deck, then it did become a bit easy. So I preferred it to A Hunt for Gollum, and it's certainly the one I played more than any others because I had to refine a deck through it, and I really enjoyed that process. It's just felt like a little bit of an anticlimax once you've got your deck right and your strategy right, because unless you're really, really unlucky, once you're in a strong position, you're going to win it. Next one is Journey to Rosco, which was very different to the previous two. It's much quicker. It had an additional ally card with a wounded eagle, basically, and the whole aim of the encounter deck was to try and kill this eagle off, and you're with the treacheries that would damage existing characters. I think any undefended attacks damage went to the eagle, and you're frantically trying to get through the forest in order to heal the eagle, get to Radagast so that he can heal, and then you get sent on a quest to find Athelis healing herbs, which is really interesting because then you've got to sort of cycle, similar to A Hunt for Gollum, you're cycling through the encounter deck to find these herbs, but you have specific locations where when you clear it, then you find a herb, for example. And then, as it turned out, I got very, very, very fortunate that when you complete the second stage and return to Radagast with the herbs, if you have enough to fully heal the eagle, then you win. If you don't, then you lose. And I was just very fortunate that on my first playthrough, I managed to have enough herbs to heal it. So it's a very, very interesting, very different mechanic to the previous two. I guess the only weakness to it is once you know that that is what you need to have by the end of the second questing phase, then you're not going to be in unless you accidentally overquest, it's not going to be a problem for you completing it. But it's still a really, really interesting puzzle in trying to make sure you're able to find those herbs, and I really, really enjoyed that one. It's probably one of my favourites. And then we get onto the Hills of Emyn Muil, and again, very, very different to the previous three, because this one was all about questing. There's a few enemies in there, but not many. You're basically questing, because it's full of locations. So if you let it get out of hand, your staging area is going to get swamped, and you've just got to continuously clear through. So thankfully, like, some of my favourite cards are cards like Northern Trackers and Lorien Guides, and Tactics Legolas Hero, who puts progress tokens on when he kills an enemy. So I felt, although I was really nervous about it going in, it seemed my deck was really well suited to it, and I was able to really manage it well and flew through it, and it almost felt too easy. And I think this is always a problem once you've got a strong deck, that a lot of the scenarios do feel easier. But I just really enjoyed the different dynamic of focusing on that questing, because you had to manage questing here. Again, similarly, you had to manage questing because you had to wait for the Athelis herbs to come out. You had to just keep your threat down while you waited for the signs for Gollum here. Whereas this one, you're just blazing through it as quick as you can. And I really, really enjoyed that one as well. Then we got onto the Dead Marshes. And that's when things start to get a lot more complicated. So this one brought in a new mechanic called escape tests. So you've cornered Gollum, and he's basically trying to escape all the time. So you have to quest as normal. So you have to make sure you've got decks that are suitable for questing. But then after the questing phase, you have to do an escape test, which is basically another questing phase. So you have to make sure you've got the cards and the characters in your decks who are able to quest twice every turn, and then still manage to deal with the enemies that are coming out. And that one terrified me when I went into it, actually, because I was really, really worried about how I would be able to manage that, because my decks, in terms of the questing, has always been very focused around Eowyn, and then throwing in Aragorn or Gimli, and then getting the allies, like I've already mentioned, the Northern Trackers and things. And I was definitely worried with how I would be able to manage questing twice when my decks were so geared up around one character. But again, similar to the Hills of Emyn it seemed to really click, and I was able to really go for it and really blaze through it, and got through that. I think I finished that one in 30 to 35 minutes, which is extremely quick for me. But it's definitely a really, really interesting and fun mechanic. And yeah, this cycle definitely got more interesting as it progressed, because I think it really changed things up. And Return to Mirkwood is basically the pinnacle of all that, because it's the first one where you have 4 scenario cards. Every one is really different. So in one stage you won't be able to draw cards. You won't be able to play cards from your hand. And there are other ones where, again, Gollum is trying to escape, and although it's not escape tests, it's different things. And then you're ambushed at the end, so you can't win without enemies. So although you've had quite a heavy questing focus, now you've got a combat focus. And there was an awful lot going on. There was it uses some of the strongest enemies in the pack. So you have the hill trolls, you have Ungoliant spawns in there, and it's just constantly barraging you with different things, and it was a really, really difficult but fun scenario. And although my playthrough, I did count it as a victory, I probably shouldn't have won. I think I should have failed, because I was grasping, I think, on some ambiguous wording on one or two of the cards right at the end to make it fall in my favour so that I would win it, which I feel a bit guilty about now. But I think because of the amount of time I've spent on Lord of the Rings, I feel like I need to showcase other games. But it was a fantastic scenario, and yeah, definitely started slowly with a hunt for Gollum, because those signs just taking so long to come out in my playthroughs. And then we had the hurdle with Conflict of the Carrack, where I had to finally dive into deck building, so I was having to play the game once or twice every night for 4 or 5 nights in order to refine a deck that could win it. But then once I had a deck that could win that, I basically blazed through the next 3, more by luck than design, with the Journey for Rosco, because I didn't know. I got very lucky that I had enough herbs when I got to the final scenario, or the final encounter card, which enabled me to beat the scenario, even though I had no idea that's what I was doing. Again, Hills of Emyn was all about questing, which I really, really enjoyed. The Dead Marshes was very, very focused on this new escape test, which I was really nervous about, but really, really enjoyed it afterwards. I can imagine that one being a pain if you don't have the right deck, because if you're failing escape tests and Gollum is escaping back into the encounter deck, then it's going to massively delay the game in a similar way to A Sign for Gollum. But thankfully for me, I didn't encounter that. And then Return to Mirkwood is just a fantastic sort of combination of everything that you've come up to at that point. So there are definitely scenarios that are stronger than others, but at the same time, I would recommend playing all of them. I wouldn't want to just have dipped in or played them out of order. I think it has a good narrative that you're starting the hunt, you're looking for a sign of Gollum. This Conflict of the Carrack is probably a bit extraneous, because it's nothing to do with the hunt for Gollum, really. You find out there's some trolls, and you don't want to leave trolls hanging around, so you go and fight them off. And then, as a result of a battle against the trolls, you find a wounded eagle, so that's it's a nice narrative touch, but it's more of like a side quest. And then you sort of get him back onto the hunt for Gollum, tracking him through the hills, then cornering him in the marshes, then dragging him back through the Shadows of Mirkwood. So I really, really enjoyed the whole cycle, really. Certainly the weakest. I know I said I wasn't going to give a score, but I'd probably give a 7 out of 10 for that one. Ranging up to... I think I probably enjoyed this one the most. I'd probably give that one a 9.5, although most of these are going to be at least an 8 to a 9.5. So they're all relatively high scoring. And hopefully one day I will complete the Dwaradav cycle and be able to move on to Khazad-dûm and bring Lord of the Rings back to the channel further down the line whilst I look at that and focus on the dwarves. But that is everything for the Lord of the Rings living card game for the moment, for the foreseeable future. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope you've joined me throughout that entire journey, because I've really, really enjoyed playing through this game again. And I'm going to leave it there and say farewell to Middle-earth for the time being. So thank you very much for watching. Look after yourself, stay safe, and have a good one. Bye-bye now.